I'm Paula Ward and this is Easy Knitting Design. This video is part 2 of shaping armholes. In part 1, I showed you how to design the armhole on the back yoke by using the measurements and stitch gauge. Here in part 2, I'll actually knit the armholes on Nikki's sweater. Here's a quick review of part 1. To shape armholes, we take the difference between the back and the shoulder width. We spread the difference evenly between the two armholes. Subtract a selvage stitch from each side, then split the shaping evenly between a bind-off on the first 2 rows and decreases on the knit side. That we cast on 180 stitches on Nikki's body. So 180 stitches cast on divided by 2 equals 90. So our number of stitches in our back is 90. Nikki's shoulder width is 14 inches. I will multiply that by the stitch gauge of 4.8 stitches to the inch to get 67.2 stitches. So I'll round that to a whole number. So our shoulder width stitches, we have 67 stitches. Now I will subtract to get the number of shaping stitches. I get 23. You may recall I need an even number, so I can divide it equally between the two armholes. Round this number up. It's 24. Now I need to divide my total number of shaping stitches, this 24 stitches, equally between the two armholes. So I will come here, divide 24 by 2, and get 12 stitches to decrease each side. Now I will subtract 1 from each side. In other words, give a stitch back to the shoulder width to get 11 stitches of armhole shaping per side. Sure enough, I have an odd number. How am I going to divide it up? Well, I'm going to say 5 stitches bind off and 6 stitches on decrease rows. We're going to bind off 5 stitches at the beginning of the next 2 rows. And we're going to decrease 1 stitch each edge every right side row 6 times. In other words, we're going to have 6 of those decrease rows. So now we can get started knitting the back. I start at the beginning of a round and count off 90 stitches, which is half of my original cast on. I'll place a stitch marker at 90 stitches, then count the rest of the stitches just to be sure I have 90 on the other half. I bind off 5 stitches on the first knit row. Notice I've placed a marker at the beginning just in case I lose my place on this first row. As I knit across the rest of the row, I weave in a contrasting yarn to mark the bind-off row. Just bring the yarn between the needles every 3 to 4 stitches. I learned this technique from Susanna Hansen, a fabulous knitting instructor. You'll find a link to her website in my resource section. I knit to the stitch marker, remove the marker, and turn my work. At the beginning of this purl row, I'll bind off another 5 stitches. Then purl across. The unworked half of the sweater just sits on the cable out of the way. On the knit row, I'll knit 2 stitches, then work my first decrease. Slip a stitch knitwise, slip another stitch knitwise, insert the tip of the left needle in front of the 2 slipped stitches, knit them together, then continue knitting. This decrease is called an SSK for slip, slip, knit. I'll mark the decrease with another contrasting yarn that will be woven in vertically on every decrease row. I'll knit across the row until my last 4 stitches. I'll work another decrease. This one is a knit 2 together, then I'll knit the last 2 stitches. Working your decreases a stitch or 2 in from the beginning or end of the row gives you a neater edge. Purl across the wrong side row. On the knit row, knit 2 stitches, then work the SSK again. Slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, insert the tip of the left needle in front of the 2 slipped stitches, knit them together, then continue knitting. Mark your decrease by bringing the marker yarn between the 2 needles. Again, when you have 4 stitches left, decrease with the knit 2 together, Knit the last 2 stitches and turn. Purl across the wrong side row. It's a good idea to check your gauge after an inch or so. After 6 rows of decreases, your armhole will have a smooth curve. You can double check the number of decreases by counting the number of times the marker yarn goes in or out of the sweater. Now work straight up and stockinette stitch for another inch, no more decreases. We'll leave the back yoke for now, but before we do, we'll measure the back yoke between the selvage stitches for a final check. Remember that 14-inch shoulder width? We nailed it. Now I'll switch to the front of the sweater and knit the V-neck.